As far as zombies and those type of undead, and of course undead is really a contradiction in terms, because if you're dead, you're dead. If you're undead, you're alive, yet the undead aren't really alive. So we'll just leave that to the philosophers. In history and in myth, there is actually less spoken of about the zombie type creature than there are about vampires. And I'm not including ghosts in the undead because the ghosts are dead. They are not physically resurrected, as are vampires and zombies. But back to what I was saying. There is less spoken of the undead in the zombie form than there are in vampires. Vampires cover centuries and are many different types, but yet I included the zombie in this class of myth and monsters because when I was reading Sumerian myth, I was struck by a passage in a poem about the marriage of Ereshkigal and Nergal. Now again, Ereshkigal is the goddess of the dead in Sumeria, and their underworld was called Ker. Ereshkigal falls in love with Nergal, and he is from the upper sphere of the gods, and of course Ereshkigal is inside the earth where Ker was located. And he came down to visit her for other reasons, and this is an aside from the point that I'm making, but I'm just, laying the scenario. And they had some non-connubial bliss, and she was compromised, but she also fell in love with Nergal. And when he left, she became very upset and distraught and wanted him back. And the head gods, Enlil in particular, said, well, he's gone from you. You can't have him. And she said, if you do not allow me to have Nergal and allow him to come back to Ker, I will loosen the dead to walk the earth, and they will eat the living, and they will outnumber the living. And when I read this, I immediately flashed on Night of the Living Dead and all of the zombie movies that came after it. So even though this type of thing is not extremely prevalent in myth, it does exist. Now I do want to clear something up. I'm sure that all of you have seen movies about Egyptian mummies. And I find those movies entertaining, but they are totally inaccurate. The Egyptians would not have a concept of the undead as we portray it in modern movies. And of course, there wouldn't be any ancient movies, as in movies. The Egyptians would not have mummified someone in order to punish that person. The Egyptians had a very strong concept of the afterlife, and as I said in the last video, at first it was only the pharaoh who would go to that afterlife, but soon it came to encompass, and I shouldn't say soon, over a period of time, it came to encompass anybody who could be mummified. The preservation of the body was what allowed the soul to live in the afterlife, and the Egyptians had a concept of a 3 or 5 part soul. Sometimes a statue or a painting of the person could do in a pinch, but the body really was necessary. If the body were not preserved, then that person simply ceased to exist. And the Egyptians feared oblivion above just about anything else. So again, they wouldn't have mummified someone, even, if that person were alive, and it would have been very, very painful. They wouldn't have mummified someone to punish that person because it would have guaranteed them an afterlife. So the Sumerians were different. And when Ereshkigal says this, whether or not that is what frightens the rest of the gods, she is allowed to marry Nergal, and Nergal comes back down to the underworld. And I won't say that they lived happily ever after. And there is a lot of Sumerian poetry that it changes, as do myth in all cultures. The earliest myths are different from later myths, and myths in ancient societies also differed by location. So people in one part of the country might have a slightly different variant of the myth that somebody would have in the other part of the country. But nevertheless, within Sumeria, just based on this very small aspect of this poem, it's clear that they did fear the dead coming back. Now, it also when we go through time and we fast forward into more recent myth, when we come into Norse myth, we see in the Völuspá, which is the story of the oracle, and the Völuspá covers the Norse myth from their creation to their demise in Ragnarok. Now, Ragnarok is the Norse Armageddon. All of the Norse knew it was coming. This is not a myth class to discuss fate and those types of myths. You'll have to take my sophomore seminar for that. But in Ragnarok, you have the forces of good fighting the forces of evil. And one of the big evil guys was Loki, the trickster god. Now, Loki had done something really bad. He had caused a very popular god, Balder, to have to stay in the underworld after his death. Now, the ancients had different concepts of deities than what modern most people in the modern world have of deity. Their gods could die, and they sometimes often did die. So Loki was chained to a big rock because he did this. And when Ragnarok came about, he was released. And this is one of the things that is a precursor to Ragnarok as well. And so prior to the big battle of Ragnarok, Loki is on a ship, and all the people of Hel, or Muspel, are with Loki. Now, that might not mean much to you, but the inhabitants, or the people of Hel, were the people, the dead people, resurrected. Christianity gets the name Hel from the Norse goddess Hel, H-E-L. And as a matter of fact, quite a few of the concepts about Christianity are based on this Norse idea, and also the Greek idea of the afterlife. And so in Norse myth, you also have the entire corpus of the dead resurrecting. Oh, by the way, their afterlife was also located inside the earth and was sometimes known as Helheim, home of the dead, or Niflheim, or Muspel. All of those places were names for the dead. And so the dead fought on the side of the bad people. So what does that say about the character of the undead? Just as with Sumeria, and just as with the modern genres of film, and also written literature as well, the undead, they ain't good people. They eat the living, and they fight on the side of the bad people in Ragnarok. And so this concept of the undead is very ancient. It continues on into modern times, and we have expanded upon it, and it has evolved. So, is there anything I wanted to say about that? I think that's all I wanted to say about that in videos, but there is a PowerPoint which you need to look at, and I've posted a couple of links to movies, but I'm sure that you have already seen zombie movies, and I'm sure that you already know quite a bit about zombies, but I don't know that you knew the origins of the zombie and the rising of the dead as it relates to very ancient myth.